All right, so why don't we go ahead and get ourselves started for this afternoon? And just to make sure that we are all where we need to be, I should remind you that it is Thursday, the 23rd day of April. I'm kind of getting my days mixed up, so I'm telling you just as much to tell myself as to remind anybody else. And this is our weekly Zoom meeting for Political Science 1, class number 30585. Just a couple of reminders. First of all, this broadcast is being recorded. So for those of us who aren't here to experience this live, they can go ahead and take a look at the recording via the Conference Zoom link on our class Canvas page. And if you are here live and you want to go back over something that we talked about during this meeting, you can go and take a look at the recording as well. The recordings are normally made available by Zoom, usually about 12 hours after a particular recording ends. And remember, as I mentioned to you in that Canvas announcement from, I think it was last week, that as of today, all Zoom meetings like this one, you have to have a password in order to get in, whether it's the live meeting or if you want to go ahead and access the recording of the meeting after the fact. So if you want to go back and take a look at this recording after it's put up on Canvas by Zoom, you use the same password that you used to get into the meeting today, and you should be just fine. So there you go. So today, a few things we want to go ahead and accomplish. The first thing that we'll talk about in just a couple of minutes is I will ask if there are any questions relating to the material dealing with our last linkage mechanism. That's campaigns and elections, because it is the campaigns and elections discussion forum post that is your next due assignment in this class. And it is due, of course, tonight at 11:59 p.m. But remember, for this assignment and every other assignment that we have this semester, including our remaining 2 tests, including all the discussion forum posts, and including the Student's Choice Project, we do have that 3-day or 72-hour grace period that is automatically attached to every assignment. So if you missed the due date for the assignment for today, you have an additional 3 days, an additional 72 hours to submit the assignment to me via Canvas, and you will not receive any penalty for lateness. So I won't deduct any points or anything like that. And one other thing that I should mention about that is I know that most of you in the class are keeping up with the assignments in the class, but there are some of you who, for a variety of reasons, probably related to this crazy situation that we all find ourselves living through right now. Maybe you've been away from the class for a few weeks. Maybe you haven't been on Canvas or anything like that, and you are significantly behind in the assignments. If that is your situation, please don't worry. You can still get through and complete this class successfully. The only thing that I would ask is please contact me as soon as you can. Send me an email, send me a Canvas message, let me know what's going on with you, and we can work out a situation where you can get caught up in the assignments and still be successful. So please let me know if that fits your situation. So we'll talk about campaigns and elections first. I'll deal with any questions that you have. Then I will talk a little bit about the process for the next assignment that is due in this class next Thursday. That is April 30th, again, at 11:59 p.m., not counting the 3-day grace period, of course. And that is test number 2. So test number 2 is already up and available for you to start working on our Canvas homepage. Click on the assignments tab in the left-hand menu, and then scroll down, click on test number 2, and there you are. So I'm going to go through the logistics and the process of test number 2 with you. Make sure you don't have any questions about that. And also, if you've already started working on test number 2, as some of you may have done, I'll also ask if you have any questions about any of the material, any of the content information that is covered in test number 2, so we can go over that as well. And then finally today, if we have any time left over, I will go ahead and spend a few minutes connecting some very recent political events in the United States that are related to the COVID-19 crisis, back to a couple of the major course themes that we talked in fair detail about at the very beginning of the semester. Because if you recall, early on in the semester, back when we were still face-to-face, after we went over the syllabus, after we talked about the Student's Choice Project options, I discussed three questions, three major concepts or theories that I said we were going to be encountering again and again and again throughout the course of the semester. So I want to kind of revisit a couple of those themes, maybe all three if we have time, and connect them to stuff that is happening politically related to COVID-19 right now in the United States. So that is the agenda for today. Now, remember, throughout our time together this afternoon, as always, if you have a question or you want to make a comment, you can either unmute your mic and ask, or if you'd rather, you can go ahead and put your question or your comment in the group chat, and that works just as well. All right. So any questions, comments, problems before we go ahead and get ourselves started for today? Anybody?
No.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get started. And as I said, the first thing that I wanted to ask you about today, see if you had any questions about, was campaigns and elections, the fourth and last linkage mechanism that we are talking about in this class. Now, if you recall last week's Zoom meeting, we went ahead and I kind of gave you an overview, sort of an extended preview of the class notes that I had just posted up for you on Canvas dealing with campaigns and elections. And I kind of gave you some of the highlights. Now, hopefully between last Thursday and today, you've had a chance to go through the campaigns and elections notes in greater detail. Hopefully you've also had a chance to take a look at the crash course videos related to campaigns and elections as well. And some of you have already submitted your campaigns and elections assignment, the discussion forum post. Some of you still are working on it. Either way, if you have any questions about anything dealing with campaigns and elections, whether it's from the class notes, the crash course videos, anything at all, now would be a great time to ask. So questions or comments dealing with campaigns and elections. Anybody at this point?
No.
We're good? Making sense?
Yeah.
All right, well, that's a good thing. So that being the case, let's go ahead as more people are now starting to join us. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the next assignment that we have coming up next Thursday. So that is April 30th. And that is, of course, test number 2. So if you haven't done so already, if you can go ahead and pull up a copy of test number 2 and have it where you can see it, that might be a good thing. You can access test number 2, again, by clicking on the assignments link on the left-hand side menu of our Canvas homepage, scrolling down to test number 2, clicking on that link, and it takes you right there. So first thing I'm going to do is explain, in case you haven't looked at test number 2 yet, how test number 2 actually works. For the most part, it's pretty much the same thing that you were doing for test number 1 that we took in class back when we were still meeting face-to-face. So I'll go over test number 2, everything that you need to do to get the best possible grade on test number 2. See if you have any questions about the process of test number 2. And then if you have any questions about any of the information, any of the actual material that's covered by test number 2, I'll be happy to deal with those questions as well. So as I said, for the most part, test number 2, which is due next Thursday, as well as test number 3, which is due at the very end of the semester, pretty much the exact same format as test number 1 that we took back, in class, timed, face-to-face, all that sort of thing. So if you take a look at test number 2, you will notice the same 2 parts as you were used to for test number 1. Part 1 being the short answer section, And for part one on this test, you see I've listed 22 terms there for you to choose from. And remember, the tests in this class, whether they're in person or online, doesn't matter. The tests in this class are not cumulative. So once I test you on something, I will not test you on that same something once again. Therefore, all of the terms that you see listed, all 22 of the terms that you see in part one of the test are things that we have learned about since test number one. So it covers our discussions of public opinion, as well as our discussions of all four of the linkage mechanisms that we've been dealing with over the past several weeks, mass media, political parties, interest groups, as well as campaigns and elections. So just like with test number one, read through those 22 terms, pick the 8 terms out of the 22 that you feel that you can do the best job of answering, and in about 3 to 4 sentences each, for each of those 8 terms, you are giving me a basic definition of that term, and you're also telling me why that term is significant, why it's important, why we bother talking about and learning about this concept in the first place, sort of how it connects to other things that we've been learning about in the class during the semester so far. So 8 terms, 3 to 4 sentences each. Each of those answers is worth a maximum of 7.5 points. So that means that there is 60 points possible in part one of the test. Like I say, just like test number one. Now, part two of the test is the mini essay section, also just like test number one. And this time I have 4 potential mini essay questions listed there for you to choose from. And again, all the mini essay questions are covering topics that we've learned about since test number one. So when you're getting ready to work on the test, read through those 4 mini essay questions, choose the question that you think you can do the best job of answering, and give me a response to that question in about 5 paragraphs. And 5 paragraphs is kind of the rough estimate. Your answer may be a little less than 5 paragraphs. It might be a little more, but 5 paragraphs tends to be kind of the average that we're shooting for. So that 5 paragraph response is worth a maximum of 40 points possible in part two. And that's how we get to 100 points for the entire test. Now, as I said, this is pretty much what you're used to with test number one, with 2 important differences. The first important difference is that this test, test number 2, because you will be working on it at home and submitting it to me via Canvas, is completely open book and open note, and it is not timed, okay? So think back to test number 1, right? You had a maximum of 1 hour and 25 minutes to complete the test. You could not consult your textbook. You could not consult your class notes or anything like that. And, you know, when we were a face-to-face in-person class, that made sense. But since you're going to be working on the test at home, it doesn't make sense to restrict you. So this is completely open book, open note. While you're working on the test, feel free to have your class notes available to look at. Feel free to have any and all of the assigned readings for this section of the course out and available for you to look at. If you feel like you need to review some of the videos that you've looked at for the class to find material that you need, please feel free to do so. You are not restricted in any way, nor will the test be timed. So in other words, we're not going to be using Proctorio or one of those other Canvas plugin programs so that we say, well, as soon as you start the test, you only have 85 minutes to work on it, and you're going to be on camera the entire time, and the camera is going to watch everything that you're doing, so we'll know if you look at your notes or the book or something like that. I don't do stuff like that. It just makes absolutely no sense to me. So again, open book, open note, and not timed. Only time restriction, obviously, is that you need to turn the test in either by the due date next Thursday at 11:59 p.m. or within that 3-day grace period following that due date. So that's the one change from test number 1. The other change from test number 1 is that if you recall on test number 1, I had you come into the test, come into class with a pre-written, pre-prepared outline for your part 2 mini essay. So you had to bring that essay outline in with you to class. You were then able to refer to that essay outline when you were actually writing your part 2 essay, and then you handed that outline in along with the rest of your test. And that essay outline gave you 5 of the 40 points possible for test number 1. We are not doing an essay outline for either test number 2 or test number 3. You do not need to submit one. And that's simply because when we were having you do the essay in class with a time limit, it made sense for you to have an outline that you could refer to, kind of take some pressure off you as you were writing your essay. But since you're doing this at home without a time limit, open book, open note, open video, all that stuff, there's just no point at all for me to make extra work for you to do the essay outline. So do not worry about the essay outline. All 40 points possible for part 2 of the test will be from the 5 paragraphs or so that you submit to me. Okay. So does that make sense? Any questions about the process or logistics for test number 2? Anybody?
So sorry. So
No,
it doesn't
please.
have to be the complete 5 paragraphs for the essay part?
Not necessarily. I mean, remember, and if you look at the questions that I have there for you to choose from, all of the mini essay questions are multi-part questions. And so, you know, they're not the kind of thing that you would be able to answer in 1 paragraph or 2 paragraphs or something like that. But that being said, everybody's writing style is a little bit different, so that, you know, if you get to 4 paragraphs or so and you feel like you've done an effective job of answering all of the different parts of the question, that's fine. By the same token, if you get to 5 paragraphs and you still have a little bit to say, feel free to go over 5 paragraphs if you want to. I specify 5 paragraphs as kind of what to shoot for, because I know that if I don't, some people will turn in 1 paragraph and say that's fine. Other people will write 10 pages and tell me that's fine. And we want to try and avoid either of those extremes if we can. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Great. So any other questions about the actual process for test number 2?
No.
Okay, so if you've had a chance to start working on test number 2, and maybe you have, or probably you haven't, are there any questions at this stage about any of the actual content, any of the actual information or concepts that I'm asking you about for test number 2? Obviously, it's not going to be your only opportunity to ask about that stuff, but it is your first opportunity. So any questions about any of the information that's covered on test number 2 at this point? Okay, so that's great. So between now and next Thursday's due date for test number 2, lots of different ways that you can get your questions answered if they come up regarding test number 2. You can always send me a Canvas message or an email. That's fine. You can also join me during my twice weekly virtual student hours on Zoom. And remember, those take place every Monday and Wednesday afternoon from 1:30 until 2:30 Pacific Daylight Time. And if you want to access the virtual student hours, the access link for Zoom and the password that you need to access the virtual student hours can be found on our Canvas homepage. So when you log on to our Canvas page, if you scroll down past the picture at the top to the section labeled Basic Course Information, there you will find the Zoom link and the password that you need to access my virtual student hours. So please feel free to jump in there either next Monday, next Wednesday, and I'll be happy to answer your questions there. Also, obviously, you can also ask me questions during our next regular Zoom meeting for this class next Thursday from 3 to 3:45. I will devote as much time as you want during next Thursday's Zoom meeting dealing with any questions that you have about test number 2. So no worries about that. All right. So lots of different ways that you can get your questions answered. So if something's not making sense on the test, or if you're having trouble understanding one of the concepts that's being asked about on the test, please feel free to let me know, and we'll get your questions answered. Okay. Okay. All right. So one last thing that I want to go ahead and do this afternoon. And this relates back to some stuff that we were talking about really towards the beginning of the semester. So if you remember early on in the semester, we spent probably a couple of class periods because we were still back live face-to-face on the LAC campus back then. We spent a couple of class periods talking about the 3 big ideas, the 3 major themes of this course. So 3 ideas or theories or concepts that I said at the time that we were going to be coming back to again and again and again during the course of the semester. Well, guess what? Today is one of those times, because what I've been noticing over the past week or so, and perhaps you've noticed this too, if you've been looking at some of the news related to government and politics in the United States, as we are all working our way through this COVID-19 crisis, you will find some things happening relating to politics in the United States and relating to COVID-19 that directly connect up actually with all 3 of the major course themes that we've talked about earlier in the semester. So I just wanted to call your attention to those and highlight those with you for just a few minutes. So first of all, maybe you've seen this either on the news on TV, or if you've been looking at the news online, that sort of thing. Over the past like 8 days or so, in a number of cities across the United States, including here in this state, in downtown Los Angeles, in Sacramento, the state capital for California, and in Orange County, in Huntington Beach, and in South Orange County, the city of San Clemente. We've seen over the past week or so a number of protests. Some of them have been quite small, maybe only 10 or 20 folks out there demonstrating. Others have been fairly large. So for example, the most recent protest in San Clemente a few days ago, there were about 500 people out there demonstrating and protesting. Now, what were they demonstrating and protesting against? Well, they were protesting against various state, county, and city laws that are requiring that all of us engage in sheltering in place, engaging in self-quarantining, and only leaving our homes for very essential tasks like going to the grocery store, or taking a walk around the block or something like that. Otherwise, we were told to stay at home, shelter in place. And because of these laws, also all non-essential businesses are closed. So that bars are closed, gyms are closed, movie theaters are closed, sporting events, major spectator sports are not taking place, concerts aren't happening, all that sort of thing. And the reason for this, there's a lot of scientific reasons as to why this is being done. What scientists, epidemiologists, infectious disease specialists, and other experts are telling us is that during these very crucial weeks of the spread of COVID-19 in the United States, the more of us that are sheltering in place and not mixing together with other people, the more limited, the more controlled the spread of the infection will be. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to eliminate the virus, that it's something that's going to go away or anything like that. But the idea here is if we really slow down the spread of the disease, It will prevent our medical systems, our hospitals, their intensive care units, that sort of thing, from becoming overwhelmed and essentially breaking down. All right. So these folks are out there protesting this. They're saying, guess what? These shelter in place laws, these other things that are going on, are essentially violations of our basic freedoms that all Americans are said to have. And so if you've seen video of any of these protests, for example, you've noticed that a lot of these folks are carrying American flags, some flags from the American Revolution, for example, the yellow flag with the coiled snake saying, "Don't tread on me." In other words, don't step on my freedoms, or you'll get bit, essentially. They're also carrying Trump 2020 re-election signs and banners and flags and all this sort of thing. And so you might be thinking, okay, well, that's nice. That's fine. What does that have to do with our major course themes? What does that have to do with Poli-Sci 1? Well, several things. For one thing, what we are able to see from, the chants that these people are giving during their demonstrations and the signs and the banners that they're carrying, most of these folks are identifying as being rather conservative in their political beliefs. Okay, so most of these folks are Republicans. Most of these folks are supporters of President Donald Trump, who is a Republican and who is running for re-election for president in November. Now, who cares? Why does this matter? Well, think back to the second major course theme that we talked about at the beginning of the semester. Remember what we said? We said that for a long time in the history of the United States, there was no significant difference, no really great difference of ideas or opinions or outlook or anything like that between Republicans and Democrats. Remember what I said? That for most of our history in the US, the difference between Republicans and Democrats in the US was kind of like the difference between vanilla ice cream and French vanilla ice cream, meaning not a whole lot. But remember what I also said, that starting in the 1980s and especially over the past 15 or 20 years or so, the amount of polarization, that is the amount of division between folks who call themselves Republicans, who have a more conservative political belief system, versus those folks who call themselves Democrats, who have a significantly more liberal political belief system, the difference between those two labels has grown dramatically. And that as the two parties have become more divided between each other, that division has also become more hostile, more bitter, more angry, etc. Right? And that's what we mean when we talk about the growth in partisan and ideological polarization. And so how different folks in the United States are responding, how Republicans versus Democrats are responding to the whole COVID-19 situation and the government's actions regarding COVID-19 are also dividing based on these partisan and ideological divisions. Now, while most Americans are generally supportive of what various state governments like California and various city and county governments have done in terms of requiring sheltering in place and closing public beaches and doing all these other things to try and limit the spread of COVID-19, while most Americans tend to be in support of that, upwards of 70 to 80% of Americans, based on some public opinion data that I've been seeing over the past few days. When there are differences of opinion amongst Americans on this issue, what we see is that the folks who are most likely to be opposed to the government taking away, limiting some of our freedom of movement and our freedom of action to stop the spread of COVID-19, those folks who oppose those government actions tend to be more conservative. They tend to be Republican. They tend to be supporters of Donald Trump. Okay, so that's one connection back to one of our major course themes. But if you think about what I've just been saying over the past few minutes, there is also a very natural connection to another one of our major course themes that stems from these demonstrations. Remember the very first theme that we talked about at the beginning of the semester? Remember how I said, I asked the question as to whether or not it was possible to understand the entire political history of the US as being a struggle between freedom and order? Remember that? Well, yeah, that's certainly true. And if you think about it, it is a debate about freedom and order that these protesters are currently engaging in. Because remember what we said. Remember back when we defined what order was at the beginning of the semester? We defined order as being governmental limits on freedom through the legitimate use of force. And remember what we said? That historically in the United States, government tends to ramp up the amount of order in society and therefore decrease the amount of freedom in society during times when there is some major national crisis happening in society. Okay. And I gave the example at the time during times of war, during times of severe economic crisis, government will frequently reduce the amount of freedoms that we have in the United States and therefore ramp up the amount of order to try and get things calmed down again, to keep us safe. We saw the same thing happen in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks back in 2001. Well, guess what? We have the same thing happening now. The only difference is that now the major crisis gripping the national government and gripping the United States generally, and pretty much the rest of the world, is the spread, the outbreak of COVID-19, the coronavirus, right? So what's government going to do? Government is going to take action to restrict our freedoms in such a way that they can slow the spread of the disease, that they can flatten the curve, right? So you see what's happening here. And the folks demonstrating in San Clemente and Huntington Beach and Sacramento and Florida and elsewhere, they're protesting against this. They said, look, we're not concerned. We're not worried about COVID-19. We think it's fake news. We don't think it's a really big threat. We much rather have our freedoms restored to us. We would much rather be able to be free to go to the beach if we want to go to a bar if we want to go to a gym if we want to, and we'll take our chances about whether or not we actually catch this virus, right? So notice, these protests deal with our first major course theme, freedom versus order. They deal with our second major course theme, which is the growing level of partisan and ideological polarization in the United States. So again, I wasn't kidding at the beginning of the semester when I said that everything that we talk about in this class throughout the entire semester is going to connect in one way or another to one or more of these major course themes. So does that make sense to us? Any questions, comments, problems about that? And if you have a question or you want to make a comment, you can either unmute your mic and ask, or if you'd rather not do that, you can go ahead and put your question or comment in the group chat. So any questions or comments about that? Anyone?
I have a comment.
Please.
Well, I was noticing a lot with the protests that people are being very extreme about it. Just kind of the freedoms that they are asking for back don't really seem like an excuse. Like people are, demanding haircuts and stuff like that. So I read a sign online. Someone said the quarantine, they compared it to their oppression to slavery.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and it kind of just reminds me of like what we were talking about with the founders' initial issue with not knowing how much to necessarily trust the people, I guess. And at first I didn't really kind of had a hard time grasping it. Like I understood, like, yeah,
Right.
not everyone is as capable of, making decisions, I guess. But seeing this reaction, it really just makes you question, like, wow, people are really kind of out of it. And I get how difficult it is to figure out, in a political like view, kind of figure out
Mhm.
what is right to do, because there are so
Yeah.
many contrasting opinions.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you stated the issue, really quite well. Um, and the problem is it's even more complicated than that, because I think for a lot of these folks, we hear the scientists, right? The experts, the doctors, the infectious disease specialists, the epidemiologists, that sort of thing, all saying, look, we can't stop the coronavirus by sheltering in place and doing all this stuff, but we can sure slow it down. And we need
Right.
to, if we are going to not completely overwhelm our healthcare capabilities in the United States and have people dying in the streets. The thing is, though, especially over the past several decades, there has been a growing distrust of so-called experts in American society, especially of scientists. Now, that may sound weird at first, but there has always been this rather small element running through American political culture, going all the way through to the beginning of the nation. There has always been this little streak of what philosophers call anti-intellectualism. And anti-intellectualism is essentially just a fancy way of saying distrust of expert opinion, right? It's like, oh, well, those doctors, those scientists, they're a bunch of eggheads, they don't get out of the lab often enough, that sort of thing. They really don't understand what really is going on in life. And so there's always been this thread, this small ongoing thread of distrust of expert opinion in the United States. And at certain points in our history, that small thread kind of blows up and becomes a significantly big deal in society. And that's what we've seen in the United States over the past 20 or 30 years. And it really, probably the best, most obvious illustration of this has been the response by some folks, and again, a relatively small number of folks in society. I know, given all the media coverage that they've got, it feels like every other person is protesting and disputing all of this stuff. It really isn't. It is a relatively small faction, a relatively small percentage of the US population as a whole. But the interesting thing to notice about this, and it goes back to the whole partisan and ideological polarization thing that we were just talking about, is that most all of the people that are expressing this distrust of experts, of scientists, of doctors, that sort of thing, are conservatives, are folks in the Republican Party, are supporters of President Trump. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because what are they hearing from the president himself? He frequently expresses a lack of trust, a lack of confidence in what the experts, what the scientists are saying. And he says that during his daily news conferences, right? So a lot of supporters of the president say, well, if the president doesn't trust these people, why should I? Why should I listen to what they have to say? Why should I shelter in place if it's really not necessary to do so? They're also hearing that message magnified by the conservative media sources where they're getting their news, right? Fox News Channel and stuff like that. And they're also hearing it on Sunday from their ministers who are saying, don't worry about COVID-19. You will be protected by the love of Jesus Christ. So that helps to explain why some folks in the country are just essentially rejecting what the experts are saying and are kind of going their own way on this. Do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, it's like a comfort, I think. Like it just has to do with like kind of people want, it's their own social, like
Exactly.
I can't think of the word, but yeah.
Well, yeah, because you know they were raised to think a certain way and believe certain people and not trust other people, and so this is consistent. And if you think about it, if you are living through a crisis situation, and this is true for all of us, regardless of our political belief systems or our religious beliefs or anything like that, if you are trying to cope with the crisis, you're going to try and fall back on those sources of information that you traditionally trust, those opinion leaders that you traditionally have trusted. And think about it. If people that you respect and trust say, this really is overblown, this really isn't as big a deal as it's being made out to be by the media, so don't worry about it, that's going to be kind of comforting, right?
Yeah. It's important to have, you know, I think with Trump being in his position, I think it makes it really hard for kind of common sense to be more of a popular opinion. So it's important.
And that's tough because, you know, I'm going to show my age here, but, you know, there's, you know, people talk about common sense and there's this old saying, you know, common sense is really rather uncommon, you know, and so a lot of people, for most people, how they define what constitutes common sense, it's going to be framed through their own experiences, their own set of filters, that sort of thing.
Right.
So,
or even their political opinions have a lot to do with that too.
Yep. And their religious beliefs and the culture in which they were raised geographically, in terms of their families, etc. Yeah. I mean, common sense, they're really, I mean, honestly,
it doesn't exist really.
Yeah, exactly. It's filtered through our own individual perspectives, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. There's really some really great thinking that you're doing on this. So any other questions or comments about any of this stuff? Now, by the way, because I've got like 2 minutes left, so I might as well use it, right? Thinking, oh Lord. But anyway, yeah. This whole COVID-19 situation also actually connects back to our 3rd major course theme that we talked about at the beginning of the semester. And just very briefly, because we're almost out of time, and you probably have other things to do, probably better things to do than look at me yammer at you on Zoom. But anyway, remember the 3rd major course theme that we talked about that's connected with the reading that you've been doing during the course of the semester about California? Remember the idea that California is essentially America fast forward, right? This is that concept by that sociologist over at USC, Manuel Pastor, who says that, you know, the United States as a whole today is experiencing a number of significant economic, political, and social problems that were previously experienced in the state of California 10, 20, 30 years ago. And guess what? Pastor says that if the US wants to get through and either solve or at least significantly fix some of these problems that we're experiencing today, it should look to California and what California did in response to these problems as a template, as a pattern, as a model to follow. And it's interesting because obviously Pastor's book has no mention of COVID-19 because COVID-19 didn't exist, or at least wasn't identified back when Pastor wrote the book about a year and a half ago, something like that. But guess what? I've been hearing stuff in the news media over the past couple of weeks that really, you know, if Pastor wants to eventually write a revised edition of his book and provide an additional really good, useful example of his assertion that California is America fast forward, he should talk about this. The fact that a lot of folks are saying, if you look around the country and you look at the 50 states that make up the United States, there are a handful of states, 3 in particular, that seem to be doing the best job, have the best handle on trying to flatten the curve, slowing down the spread of COVID-19, and are just handling the various elements of this crisis the best and most effectively. Those 3 states are the state of New York, the state of Ohio, and the state of California. And in particular, I've seen a number of articles from national media, like the New York Times, and also from international media like The Guardian, a newspaper based in Great Britain in the United Kingdom, that are saying, you know what? Look at what California is doing. Look at what California is doing under the direction of California's governor, Gavin Newsom. And they're saying, look, the rest of the country, the other 49 states, and really other countries around the world should look at what Newsom and California are doing to deal with COVID-19, and they should follow California's model as a template, as a pattern. There have even been some folks who said, boy, Gavin Newsom is really impressive. He kind of came out of nowhere. Maybe he should run for president in 4 years or something like that. So really interesting. Maybe another example of how California could be seen potentially as America fast forward. Does that make sense? Any questions about that, or comments or reactions? Okay, great. So I ran a couple minutes over. I apologize for that. Let me just wrap up really quickly. Maria, do you have a question? Go ahead.
No, I don't have a question.
Okay, I just saw the mic unmute, so I thought maybe you had. I didn't want to cut you off unfairly. Okay, so just to wrap up, remember tonight at 11:59 p.m. plus the 3-day grace period, your discussion forum post on campaigns and elections is due. And then 1 week from today, again, next Thursday, April 30th at 11:59 p.m., plus the 3-day grace period, your test number 2 is due to be submitted to me via Canvas. Now, if you have questions about test number 2 or about anything having to do with the class between now and then, you can always send me a Canvas message. You can always send me an email. You can stop by my virtual student hours. I'll be having them twice next week, next Monday afternoon and next Wednesday afternoon from 2:30 to 3:30 Pacific Daylight Time. And you can get the Zoom link for those virtual student hours and the password that you need to join on our Canvas homepage for this class in the basic course information section just below the picture on our Canvas homepage. Also, our regularly scheduled Zoom meeting for this class next Thursday afternoon, I will spend as much time as you want answering questions about test number 2. So until we meet again, until we talk again, remember, we are going to get through this crisis successfully. We are going to get through this class successfully. Why? Because we're all in this together. There's strength in numbers. And remember, you are never alone. Feel free to reach out to me for anything having to do with the class or anything else in your life that you think I might be able to help you out with. Even if it's just a few minutes to vent, I'm a great listener. So take care, be safe, and I'll see you again soon. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great seeing you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.